In a world overwhelmed by silence, where power is traded behind closed doors, and where the voices of the oppressed are often drowned by the noise of foreign propaganda, something extraordinary happened. It was a moment not dictated by global agendas or manipulated by foreign media. It was a day when one voice cut through the chaos, a voice that would not be silenced, bribed, or bought. This wasn't just a speech. It wasn't a political stunt. It was a reckoning. And the man who delivered that reckoning, he wasn't wearing a tailored suit. He wasn't backed by corporate interests. He didn't fly in on a private jet with a Western ambassador at his side. No, he stood firm, in uniform, standing before his people, grounded, focused, fearless. It happened in Burkina Faso, a country often forgotten in global discussions, a country dismissed by Western powers as just another developing nation in need of aid, support, and stability. But what the West fails to understand is that behind the statistics and the stereotypes lies a people whose spirit refuses to be broken. A land where the fire of freedom still burns, and on that day, it burned brighter than ever. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a young military officer who rose through the ranks not through politics, but through sacrifice, experience, and sheer bravery, chose to speak. And when he did, what came out of his mouth wasn't the kind of speech that gets praised in Western newspapers. It wasn't the type that gets retweeted by global think tanks. It was something more powerful, more raw, more real. He began by pointing out a painful truth, one that African leaders have been afraid to say publicly for decades. He said that Africa is not poor. Africa has never been poor. Africa is being robbed. He said that the resources of Africa, its gold, its diamonds, its uranium, its oil, are not disappearing into the ground. They are being extracted, shipped away, processed in foreign capitals, lighting up the streets of Paris, fueling industries in Berlin, powering homes in New York, while the villages where those resources come from remain in the dark. He asked a question so simple, yet so profound. If Africa is rich in natural wealth, then why are its people still poor? Why are our children dying in hospitals with no medicine? Why are our farmers abandoned by policies that prioritize exports over food security? Why do we have to beg for loans using our own resources as collateral? The answer, he said, was clear, because the system was never designed to benefit Africans. It was built to exploit them. And that system, he declared, must fall. The silence in the room was deafening. Every word he spoke was like a dagger cutting through decades of lies. The foreign diplomats who were present sat stone-faced, uncomfortable, unmoving. They knew what he was saying was true, but they also knew that truth was dangerous. Because when people hear the truth, when they wake up to the lies, they begin to ask questions. And when they ask questions, they begin to demand change. And when they demand change, empires fall. He didn't just speak about Burkina Faso. He spoke about Mali. He spoke about Niger. He spoke about Guinea. He spoke about Congo. He spoke about the entire African continent that has been bled dry by centuries of exploitation disguised as development. He called out the hypocrisy of Western governments who talk about democracy while funding dictatorships, who speak of peace while profiting from arms sales, who claim to support stability while igniting chaos to gain control over vital regions. He said it openly, loudly, fearlessly. Africa does not need charity. It needs freedom. It doesn't need more foreign troops. It needs sovereignty. It doesn't need advisors who serve foreign interests. It needs leadership that serves the people. And then he delivered the blow that would echo far beyond that room. He said that Burkina Faso would no longer be a colony, not officially, not economically, not militarily, that the era of pretending to be free while being controlled was over. He announced that all foreign military forces who were not respecting the sovereignty of the nation had to leave. He declared that the gold mines and natural resources of the country would no longer be owned by faceless corporations headquartered thousands of miles away. He vowed that Burkina Faso would rise, and that it would rise on its own terms. The global response was immediate. Within hours, news agencies in the West began painting him as a threat, a populist, a potential tyrant. They conveniently left out his words. They didn't broadcast the truth he had spoken. They edited it, twisted it, and tried to silence it. But the people had already heard him. And what they heard changed everything. Across Burkina Faso, young men and women flooded the streets in support. They waved flags, sang songs, and chanted his name. Not because he promised riches, not because he made empty political statements, but because he reminded them of something they had forgotten. They are powerful. In neighboring countries, his words ignited a spark. In Mali, young people echoed his speech on social media. In Niger, activists began calling for an end to foreign interference. In Guinea, leaders started reevaluating their partnerships with exploitative foreign corporations. Across Africa, the seeds of unity were being planted, not by global organizations, not by United Nations missions, but by one man's decision to speak with honesty and courage. And yet Traoré knew that speaking the truth comes with consequences. He knew that Western powers would retaliate, that economic threats would follow, that aid would be withdrawn, that media attacks would intensify. But he said something remarkable. He said that the cost of freedom is always high, but the cost of slavery is higher. He said that Burkina Faso would survive, that Africa would endure, that the continent had survived centuries of colonialism, slavery, partition, and war, and still stood. And now it would stand tall. He called on other African leaders to stop waiting for permission, stop waiting for approval, stop waiting for foreign validation. He reminded them that the liberation of Africa would not come from Paris or London or Washington. It would come from Bamako, from Niamey, from Kinshasa, from Addis Ababa, from Lagos, from Accra, from every corner of the continent where people dare to dream of a better future. He warned that those who continue to sell out their countries will face the judgment of their people and of history, that the days of hiding behind foreign embassies and foreign money were coming to an end. And he told the youth, the millions of young Africans who are the future, that they must no longer accept mediocrity, that they must no longer allow their dreams to be crushed by corrupt systems and imported ideologies. He told them to believe in themselves, to rise, to organize, to rebuild. He said that no one would do it for them, that no one had ever given Africans freedom. It had always been fought for, and now was the time to fight, not with weapons, but with ideas, with unity, with pride, with vision. The speech, though not long, carried the weight of a revolution. It reminded the world that Africa is not asleep, that its people are not powerless, that its future will not be written by foreigners, but by Africans themselves. The Western reaction was predictable. Sanctions were whispered, trade threats were made, military cooperation was reconsidered, and media outlets across the global north began running coordinated stories questioning Traoré's legitimacy, his competence, his goals. But the people didn't buy it. They saw through the lies. They knew that if the West feared him, it was because he was telling the truth, and they stood with him. Traoré isn't a saint. He isn't perfect. But in a world where leaders sell out their people for a seat at the global table, he stood out by refusing to bow. He is not just leading a country, he is leading a moment, a movement, a mindset shift. He represents the return of the African leader who serves the people, not foreign masters. He represents the spirit of Sankara, of Nkrumah, of Lumumba, of Cabral. And now, as the world watches, one question remains. Will Africa follow? Will the people rise? Will this moment become a movement that reshapes the continent? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. On that day when Traoré spoke the truth, something changed. The silence was broken, the lie was exposed, and Africa finally began to speak for itself. This story isn't just about one man. It's about a generation, a continent, a rebirth. It's about reclaiming what was stolen, about rising from the ashes of exploitation, about remembering who we are. Because we are not weak, we are not beggars, we are not dependent. We are rich, we are powerful, we are Africans, and our time is now.